Okay, welcome to today's podcast, which is all about the changing landscape of data privacy and what marketers need to know. I'm delighted to be joined today by Meghan Bazaman. So Meghan is the Senior Marketing Analyst at Getapp, which is a Gartner digital markets company. They've just conducted a survey and she'll be discussing the findings from that survey, which is Getapp's 2022 privacy-focused marketers and consumers survey. So the results aren't even out yet. So we've got a sneak preview into what they found. So we'll be discussing that and the latest trends, issues, and developments in marketing technology. And I'm also joined by Pete Whitmarsh, Head of Paid Media here at Search Laboratory. So Pete's teams, which include paid search, display, paid social, they market to people online. So Pete's teams are really at the sharp end of marketing and privacy and what you can do and what you can't do. I'm also joined by Jimmy McCann. So Jimmy is Head of Digital Strategy at Search Laboratory and also the lead at Search Laboratory on marketing technology, including analytics. So again, is a bit of an expert on what you can track, what you can't track, all of that stuff. And my name's Ian Harris. I'm the founder of Search Laboratory. I'll be asking the questions and hosting the podcast today. So if we launch straight in, I think it'd be quite good to have a recap of what's happened so far and where we actually are with this privacy stuff, because I think a lot has happened and it's coming gradually, and I think a lot of people actually don't know where we are and what you can do and what you can't do. So we'll spend a bit of time on this. So I suppose my layman's view of it is that over time, privacy, rules and regulations around privacy, and also technology providers such as Apple and Google have brought in their own rules, and we get to the position where cookies, the kind of fundamental identifier of online interactions, are kind of slowly disappearing. And there's two types. There's the first party cookies. There's the ones set by a website that recognize you, and then that website can recognize you when you come back or when you load another page or whatever. And they're pretty fundamental to the workings of the internet, those cookies. The rules are getting tighter on those, but then third-party cookies. So that's where you visit a website and another property, another website sets a cookie. So that's, for example, when you go to a website that sells pens, and then Facebook know that you've been there and then can start to understand your online behaviors. That's a third-party cookie. They are very much disappearing. So this is kind of what's happening. And I suppose if I hand over to Jimmy to say, yes, well, what's the situation? What does this mean for analytics right now?
Yeah, so I suppose the as you mentioned, analytics is the first party cookie, and that the usefulness of a first party cookie as a definition of a user has become less useful over time. It's waned. Not only as the regulation changes and the technology changes meant that's impacted the situation, the way we browse the internet, the mobile explosion 10 years ago, that has changed the way that we track users in analytics. So therefore, if you're cross-device browsing, by default, you would be classed as in analytics as two separate users, when actually you might have found them under two different methods. And the impact of that, I suppose, that the inability to string that user's journey together and see what influenced them in their journey to go sign up or purchase, means that you could inefficiently spend money or overvalue certain activities later on in the funnel and undervalue things earlier on in the funnel. So yeah, we've it's all reached a critical mass, I suppose, in the last year or two, with the regulation, but also behaviours changing, meaning that Universal Analytics, Google's original product, analytics product, isn't really fit for purpose in terms of measuring users. So that's led them to re-engineer and rebuild the whole analytics measurement framework and release GA4, which is much better at doing that. So that's the response to that.
Okay, and so what you said is cross-device. We're losing those user journeys. Is it the case that if a user is using the same device, so they're using a phone constantly or they're using a PC constantly, can you still track them coming back sort of 2 weeks later to your website? Is that still a thing?
On the same browser?
Yes.
On Chrome, yes. On Safari, no.
Okay. So it depends which browser they're actually using. So Safari is deleting those cookies, whereas Chrome isn't.
After 7 days.
After 7 days, right? Okay. So we're getting into a bit of detail, but yeah, it's closing in. And so Pete, over to you for what does that mean for your marketing teams? For them to actually execute marketing campaigns.
Yeah, so there's a few impacts that it has on the marketing side of things. I suppose one of them is kind of following on from what Jimmy was saying, the actual tracking of a user. It's really critical within advertising to be able to track what behavior the users are taking. So we want to know if they've clicked on one of our adverts, have they bought a product? And that allows us to track the return on investment of the advertising campaigns that we're running. So that's something really fundamental to not only the kind of macro decisions that you make in terms of marketing budgets, but also the micro decisions that you make in terms of little tweaks and optimizations that you make within campaigns, within ad creatives, within targeting methods that you've got. Everything that you're doing kind of comes down to this tracking and your ability to understand what impact that is actually having on the bottom line. So yeah, if we are losing visibility of someone who's browsed through Safari after 7 days, then that means we are not able to see if someone's clicked on an advert today but then purchases a product from our website in 2 weeks. We're not able to actually connect those two things together. We can't understand what's happened there. Also, if someone's interacted with multiple different forms of advertisement, so if they've seen a display advert, they've seen a YouTube advert, they've seen a Facebook advert, they've clicked a PPC advert, and then they've bought a product, typically we'd want to attribute that and divide the value between those different touch points to try and get a sense of how much each one of those contributed to the overall purchase. And again, with limitations to tracking, it makes it quite a imperfect system, really, doing that kind of thing. It means we are limited on the visibility and the accuracy, I suppose, of everything like that. It does also mean things like remarketing are a little bit limited. So actually advertising to someone who's previously been to your website or interacted with your website in a certain way, that's limited. Again, that's all very much based on cookies. So if cookies are getting deleted, then we aren't able to kind of hold remarketing lists of the same size and over the same duration. And also things like third-party audiences in display are impacted. So one of the ways of buying display audiences is to purchase third-party audience data. So that might be data that some other tracking company has aggregated, and then they will sell on to a display advertising provider, and then you can tap into that as an advertiser. So yeah, limitations around that kind of thing as well. So yeah, it's kind of impacting a few different areas. I guess there are, I won't go on to the solutions just yet unless you want me to, Ian, but yeah, there are kind of various things that are happening in terms of workarounds and fixes and estimations for what's what we can do instead of that.
Okay, so yeah, we'll come on to solutions later, but essentially we're struggling to track through analytics a complete picture, and and therefore actually through the platforms themselves, when we're buying marketing, when we're buying spots online, tracking and attributing is we're getting more patchy information is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and actually just further to that, analytics is one part of this, but for something like Facebook, where the majority of Facebook users are going through the app, and a lot of that app usage is on iPhones, and Apple have introduced ITP, intelligent tracking prevention, and opt-in for privacy sharing on mobile. It means we're losing a much higher percentage of those users than we would be doing if we were just kind of on desktop in Chrome, for example. So yeah, certainly, someone like Facebook is impacted very heavily by this in terms of their tracking ability.
Okay, and so thanks for that. And Meghan, how aware are marketers of what has happened, and do they generally understand the privacy laws and how they should be applied?
Yes, yeah, marketers are aware of privacy changes and the impact that these changes could have on their ability to target and track consumers, or to collect, robust data and even accurate data. They know that, failure to recognize or react to data privacy changes could lead to negative consequences like legal or, loss of customer data, or even as far as damage to their brand or business. Um, in research we recently conducted among nearly 300 U.S. marketers, we found that 51% of respondents are concerned about the issue of data privacy as it relates to their marketing practice. And compared to a year ago, 50% of marketers say they're more concerned about data privacy limiting the effectiveness of their company's marketing efforts. Now, as far as
sorry, is that 50% more are concerned now? Okay.
Yes. Now, as far as their general understanding of privacy laws and how they should be applied, they, as I mentioned, they're aware, but our research is actually demonstrating that there's some confusion around what these laws really mean and what to do about the laws. So, for example, fewer than half of the marketers we survey consider themselves very or extremely familiar with the California Consumer Privacy Act, so CCPA, or GDPR. So these are two of the most important comprehensive privacy laws out there on the books. Also, surprisingly, we found that 67% of marketers believe that the US has a singular law that covers the privacy of all types of data, when in fact it does not. So there's definitely some confusion, and marketers are also sometimes unsure if or when privacy laws might apply to their business. So we found that half of all the marketers in our study weren't sure if data privacy laws or regulations even applied to their company.
Interesting. So there's confusion out there, which I think we'd probably agree with what we see from marketers is yeah, I mean, there's confusion around maybe what the law is, because it's quite complex. We do courses on it internally, and it's quite hard stuff. But then layered on top of that, you've got what the technology companies like Apple and Google and Safari, what all these sort of technology platforms are implementing in terms of privacy, that I think the marketers need to understand as well. So it's a complex picture. Okay, thanks for that. So compliance. So how are marketers complying with these rules that I think we've heard from Meghan that actually probably half of them don't really fully understand. What does the survey say in terms of how companies are complying, Meghan?
Well, we found that compliance varied a bit among marketers in our survey. And as I noted earlier, there's difficulty understanding the more established laws. So it's even a bigger hurdle to stay up to date with emerging privacy laws and changing laws. So we found that a little more than half of the marketers from our survey say they are prepared to comply with new data privacy regulations, Most say they took actions like changing the types of sources of customer data they collected, maybe changing their data collection policies, and some even conducted risk assessments. However, more than half of marketers said that privacy laws and regulations change so frequently that compliance is unrealistic. And, with an absence of federal regulations for marketers in the US, data privacy regulations just aren't uniform and therefore very difficult to keep up with and comply with.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly from a personal perspective, it's difficult to different laws in different areas. It's hard stuff. It's so I kind of sympathise with them. What are we seeing, Pete and Jimmy, from a compliance perspective on our client base without naming any names? How do we feel that our clients are embracing and changing their marketing based on this stuff?
Yeah, I think there's a few things to touch on here. One is kind of the implementation of cookie policies on websites, and we've seen a wide spectrum, I guess, across our client base, but the wider market of different websites as well, in terms of how people have implemented those cookie policies. So yeah, some people will take a fairly aggressive stance on it, and almost make the default the big button that comes up when that cookie banner pops up will make the default either decline all, or it kind of makes it easier to not have the cookies, and then that's kind of disastrous from an advertising point of view. Really, you really can't track those people, and it means we lose a massive amount of visibility and a massive amount of the kind of audience and personalization efforts that we would typically put into an advertising campaign. We see some very much on the other end of the spectrum where they they either kind of hide a cookie banner away, or they make it very easy to say accept all and quite tricky to not accept all. So yeah, huge spectrum of different approaches that we see to it. I think when we did this podcast a year ago, I'd mentioned about Amazon and how they'd kind of hidden a tiny cookie banner away at the top of the page, and most people wouldn't even notice it. It is interesting to see that Amazon have since updated that, and they do have a bit more of an explicit approach on cookies, and kind of accepting those or kind of selecting the individual ones there. So I guess something must have made them a little bit scared in terms of the approach that they were previously taking.
And do we get a sense of so there's different approaches being taken by different companies? Do we get a sense of whether they're taking those approaches in ignorance or in? And when I say that, I mean, do they fully grasp the rules of what they're allowed to do? Or are they having things imposed upon them by the legal teams, or are they actually on purpose trying to hide the things away, or is it a complete mixture of these things?
Yeah, I think a real mixture, to be honest. I think there's definitely been times where it has been a legal team making these decisions, and the digital marketing team in certain cases haven't even known that the legal team had been making those decisions, and suddenly the website gets updated and suddenly all the traffic gets lost, if you like, or all the tracking of the traffic at least gets lost. So it's been as much of a surprise to some of the teams that we work with as it has been for us. So yeah, there's been cases like that. There's also been cases where the decisions have very much been fronted by the digital teams, and that's probably the cases where they understand a little bit more of the, I guess, the pros and cons, or the risks of not complying versus the rewards of being able to track and kind of measure the activity that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real kind of I suppose a financial tension in that if you can track everything and if you can follow users about, your marketing will be better, it will be more effective, you'll understand what works. But on the other hand, you have the legal teams whereby it is easier to be compliant by removing everything, by saying, we're not going to track anything. So, real tension of and there's an easy approach one way, an easy approach the other way, and both of them actually have got to meet in the middle, probably.
Yeah. I think it does vary a bit from country to country as well in terms of the clients that we're working with. So even though the entirety of the EU and the UK is covered by GDPR, there's different interpretations of GDPR in different countries as well. I don't know if you've seen that France and Austria have both basically declared that Google Analytics is illegal, or doesn't comply with GDPR. So even though France and Austria are covered by the same version of GDPR that covers the rest of the EU, they've kind of taken a very specific stance on Google Analytics. And we do actually have clients based in those regions who are kind of looking at that a bit more seriously than they might do if they were headquartered elsewhere.
And we have clients that are running campaigns globally in all these different countries, so I can imagine it must be a nightmare for those clients. Okay, so I suppose we're sort of up to date with what's happening. How are things changing then? So I suppose, Meghan, first of all, any new privacy changes or updates to regulations? And I'm saying since we covered this topic a year ago. So we did a podcast like this a year ago, and it feels to be moving so fast, this area. But is there anything that's sort of come in the last year that showed up in the survey?
Well, this isn't referring to the survey, but we are seeing America edge closer to a federal data privacy law. So just in June, U.S. legislators in the House and the Senate proposed a bill called the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. And this would allow users to opt out of targeted advertisements or to sue internet companies and properly sell their data. So I think this is really important, and it's been the biggest effort to date to pass the federal privacy law in the U.S.
Okay, so I suppose for us that a federal law is a bit like our GDPR. It just covers the whole country, whereas right now, what is it, state by state?
Yes, different states have different privacy laws, and there are a few that have more comprehensive laws. California, Utah, Virginia. But for the most part, it's very hard for marketers to understand because there's different regulations by state, and it's very confusing.
Right. Okay. And what do they generally do? Do they generally sort of pick on the Californian one and comply with that, or do they offer different rules for different states?
Well, since California was first to the table, I think people are most ramped up with, that law. But as far as, new and emerging changes, like I said, it's, having to keep themselves up to date, and that can be a challenge.
Yeah. Okay. And then, Jimmy, I suppose from our perspective, is there any other technological changes in the last year that I mean, we talked about GA4, which we can talk about, and universal disappearing. Is there anything else that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I know that all the big technology providers are looking at privacy preserving measurement and privacy safe measurement, but particularly with Google, they've made some good strides ahead with consent mode, which is a feature of GTAG and GTM, where it works with the consent management platform and respects the decision to not place a cookie and track an individual. However, it will collect a cookieless ping upon a conversion occurring. So that would not be a user identifiable ping. It's just a cookieless ping, as I say. And that enables then Google Ads, but also GA4 to then model based on the known data it's got, model its conversion number back to 100 when previously they might
Yeah.
have had 10% decline in cookies and missing out on 10% of the actual number of conversions that they had. And then more recently, very recently, it's just in testing at the moment, but it's going to come out soon, is consent mode with behavioral features. So you will get cookieless pings on your website events, and then that will be modeled again into a behavioral analysis and restore everything back to 100.
Okay, so Google collecting cookieless pings and modeling it back into the data sounds like sort of rebuilding analytics. It sounds like they're rebuilding the picture within analytics that you can't see. Do we think that will be susceptible to a future privacy law, or is it too early to tell?
Well, if it is it is aggregated. It is non-user identifiable.
Okay.
So as far as I'm aware, that is complying. And I'm sure they've done the homework before launching this thing. So yes, unless there's something new that around the corner that will be launched, then that is a solution to this predicament.
Yeah.
And then we also have other things in the offing that will probably take time, like the Google Sandbox stuff, and that's more long term attribution and measurement in a privacy safe manner.
Okay. So stuff coming along to try and complete the picture that doesn't use cookies, which is interesting. It's a funny one, isn't it? Because fundamentally, on the one hand, people are saying they don't want to be tracked, and then tracking companies want to track, and I wonder where it'll end up.
Another thing being talked about and being pushed is the whole education piece and showing consumers and website users the value of allowing consent. So it's completely being transparent and open and educating as to the benefits of consenting.
Yes.
So that you know exactly how they're going to use your data, and that will benefit you.
Yes, I suppose. Yeah, I think that's the thing, and we'll come on to the sort of why people are afraid. But I kind of know what these companies want to do with my data. I go into websites and just consent. I mean, I don't. I assume a lot of people that do that, they just can't be bothered to read and select the options. They just consent. So that brings us on to the sentiment behind all of this of users, and I don't know if you've got anything from this in the survey, Meghan, which is what is behind this. What are users feeling? What are they afraid of? And yeah, why don't they? What don't they want to share? I suppose.
Well, we are seeing shifting privacy expectations from consumers. And according to Gartner research, 76% of consumers are somewhat or extremely concerned about how companies collect and use their personal data. So, we know that consumers do take data privacy seriously, and they do want more control over how companies use their information. And I think this could be driven by a few factors, like increasing awareness among consumers. They've become more aware of how their data is collected, what type of data is collected, and that companies tend to keep this information for a long time. And they want to protect themselves from having their data be misused. So, every day we hear more and more stories about ID theft and fraud and misinformation. So I think, those are contributing factors. And then, another consideration I think is trust. So, from the consumer perspective, how companies treat data extends to how they treat customers. And our survey found that 84% of consumers say the way a company treats their data reflects how they'll be treated as customers. So, bottom line is that consumers want and expect more data privacy and security from the businesses they interact with.
Yeah, okay. And it's I mean, this is the hard one, isn't it? Because I think we all want, and we don't want the horror stories. We don't want we don't want identity theft, and we don't want our financial or health information shared with anyone, or our personal information. But what is getting washed out with that is any web tracking, which isn't personally identifiable. It's a hard one. This, Pete, do we know how many people do opt in, opt out of cookies? I mean, Meghan said that 76% of people are concerned or very concerned about these issues. Do you get a sense of how many people are like me and just press the consent button?
Yeah, I mean, it varies hugely depending on the implementation of that cookie banner, I suppose.
Yes.
But one of the main ones to look at is not Facebook, Apple's implementation of the privacy options that you get on there, because that is very much sort of 50-50. It's basically, would you like to have advertising tracking cookies? I don't know exactly what it says, but would you like to have this or not? And there's a yes or no button essentially. And it really varies depending on where you look at the numbers on this, but somewhere between about 68% and 96% of people are choosing not to accept the tracking. So yeah, I say there's a lot of different estimations of this depending on where you go. There was actually a good stat from Gartner on this as well that I came across, which they're saying at the moment it's about 85% are being declined, and they actually expect that to improve over time, or I say to improve, this depends on your take on it, but they expect that number to go down over time. So they're expecting it to decline from 85% to 60% by 2023.
On what? On Apple? On Apple?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, because you're on mute, Jimmy.
Is it app tracking transparency, that one?
This is the opt-out rate for mobile app tracking. Yeah, so it'll be the app tracking transparency.
So it's a hard one, this, because the way that question is posed when I go into my iPhone and get the update, it's very easy to say no to everything. Do you know what I mean? It's you don't fully understand the question. You've got to answer it once. It's kind of, do you want to give away all your data, or are you happy, or would you like to not? It's individual websites, and are people actually saying no to cookies on individual websites? It's kind of a different question, isn't it? And I think the fundamental behind it, which is where Meghan's survey comes in, really, is do people even understand what they're saying yes or no to? That's the thing, because we know about this stuff, and I don't fully know what I'm saying yes or no to each time, because I just want to read what's on the website. You can't read them all the time. So interesting. So the future, where do we think it's going? So we've already said, Meghan's already said that there's a federal law coming in the US. Meghan, is it likely that federal law is more or less privacy focused than the current state level laws? So is it, I suppose, is it tighter? Is it going to be more restrictive, or do we not know yet?
I don't know the specifics. I'm assuming it would be stricter, but or have a greater impact than CCPA, but I couldn't tell you with certainty.
Yeah. Okay. So we know that's happening. Is anything else happening, sort of technologically, or Jimmy's mentioned a couple of things there, which is GA4, which it sounds as if everyone's got to get that implemented. In fact, they're sunsetting the universal analytics next year, is it? So that's
July.
going, Jimmy.
July next year.
July next year. So there's one more year of universal analytics, then everything's on GA4. Anything else that's happening or that people should be doing right now, marketers should be doing right now to try and address this?
I think one of the big things to mention is Facebook Conversions API, or CAPI as it's become known. So that is, something that Facebook are pushing very hard. It's actually going to be mandatory for Facebook advertisers to implement that. Like it's a matter of either implement CAPI or get 0 conversions essentially in the future. So I think that's from 2023. That'll be the case. So yeah, that's definitely something to do sooner than later. So just to quickly sort of go through how that works, it's very similar to enhanced conversions in Google, which is also something that you should be doing. The way it works is that you're kind of essentially sending a privacy safe list of email addresses or phone numbers back to the platform, so kind of hash data back to the platform, and then the platform is matching that data up with their users. So Facebook can match an email address to a user registered with Facebook. So if you're saying we received a conversion from this user with this email address, Facebook can match that up to a user on their platform and then track that back to see what adverts they saw in the first place. So yeah, that's definitely a big thing to jump on sooner than later, as well as enhanced conversions in Google. I think it's a complete no-brainer at this stage. It helps not only with the tracking, but it helps with the kind of machine learning and auto bidding and all the other systems that Google and Facebook have running as well, because it gives them more data to work with, as well as giving us more data to actually report on and optimize too.
Yeah, and I suppose so. These solutions or these workarounds, they don't use the cookie. They're using pings or whatever, and data's passing between. I wonder how susceptible they are to future technology, legislation, whatever. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying they should be, because it's probably it's got arms and legs and running away now, this privacy stuff. But anything else on the analytics side, Jimmy, that people should be doing? So we've said get GA4 implemented, get consent mode on there. Anything else coming in the future?
No, all the further in, that's not Google done or anything, or GA4 done. There are future enhancements that will come that we don't even know about now. They will be come in and they'll become baked into GA4, so it will just naturally evolve in a the best compliant, privacy safe way.
And in terms of first party data, so that we're always talking about companies should use first party data, and are we seeing a big pickup in that? So that this is where companies collect the data themselves, and they have that relationship with the client, and they get consent in order to do that, and then they would use that for marketing. It's not it's getting consent to use that. Is there a big pickup in this? And is that
absolutely
helping?
So, like, Pete mentioned a couple of methods, i.e. enhanced conversions and the conversions API, that is using first party data to verify that a conversion occurred. Other ways to use first party data are to alter the value of the conversion based on the information that your website might not necessarily have. So that might be that you want to optimize not to a last click revenue number. You might want to optimize to something a bit more befitting of lifetime value. So, optimize for long-term valuable customers. And that is a product, first party data. You would use that to then inform or predict that user X and user Y actually previously you might have valued them the same, given that they just converted in the same manner, but actually based on first party data, you might understand that one is worth a lot more than the other, and therefore you can adjust the value of the conversion using various number of methods available, using conversions API, or even like a calculation that occurs potentially in SA360 to upweight or downweight the value of that conversion, and then the machine learning technology and smart bidding will then optimize to the more valuable set of users and campaigns, etc.
I know we've done some work where we've looked at which users are more valuable based on paths through the website, based on demographic information, or where they're from in the country, or what shop they're near, if the company's got shops. And I know we've used machine learning to do that stuff, and that's all first party stuff, I'm assuming.
Yeah, everything that you collect on your users, that obviously your analytics is your first party data, but then you also have your customer CRM and potentially store data, etc.
Okay, good. So that's where it's going. That's what people should be doing about it. I think we're probably running out of time, so we've covered a lot there. So if there is any questions that anybody has on this stuff, because it is a complex area, please get in touch. That Search Laboratory we've got experts that look at this, technical and legal. So please do get in touch, and we'll do our best to help you out. But just to say, thank you so much to Meghan, Pete, and Jimmy for joining us today, and thanks for listening.